The dry wind of Dustwood County carried with it the scent of horses, tobacco, and worn-out dreams. It scratched at the wooden siding of buildings, like claws trying to peel the town apart. Dust blew through the cracked windows of the saloon and rolled down the empty dirt streets like tumbleweeds, with nowhere left to settle. Noon sun beat down hard, washing the whole town in faded gold and casting long shadows behind everything: people, buildings, and regrets. Eli Mercer stood in one of those shadows, leaning against a fence post behind the saloon. He held a tin cup of coffee gone cold, untouched. His hat was low, jaw-dusted with silver stubble, and his eyes, gray like storm clouds that never delivered rain, were fixed on the gathering crowd. Behind the saloon was a clearing where most wouldn't linger unless they had no other place to be. Today, however, word had spread. A rough-looking man with missing teeth and yellow-stained fingers stood on a crate, calling out prices like it was a cattle auction. But there were no animals here, just people. The rustling of boots and the low grumble of conversation built like heat on skin. Most of the town had turned up, not because they needed help, but because they were curious or bored or cruel. Standing on the platform was a girl, barefoot, her dress little more than frayed linen hanging off bony shoulders, hair tangled like brush left in the wind too long. Her arms hugged her sides. She didn't cry. That part of her had dried up long ago. She just stood there, still, eyes hollow but defiant, like she dared someone to look away. The man on the crate slapped his hand on a beam. "Young, strong, and quiet. We start at $5. Who'll take her?" Silence. Eli didn't move. He didn't even blink. His eyes settled on her face. That stillness. There was no beauty in the usual sense. No perfume, no smile, nothing sweet. Just the truth of her, unhidden, unadorned, and heavy. "Come on now," the man growled. "She's good for labor. Can cook, clean, feed chickens. Young enough to make more hands if you need 'em." The girl turned her face slightly toward the crowd, and that's when she spoke. "Please," her voice cracked like a branch in drought. "Just make it quick." The words hung in the air, too sharp to ignore. A few men chuckled. One woman turned her head away. A boy whispered something to his friend. But no one stepped forward. Eli pushed off the post. $2, he said. The auctioneer laughed. "She ain't worth 2 chickens and a bent coin." Eli looked up then, slow and steady. "That's the offer." The man sneered but shrugged. "Fine, $2. Ain't my pride that's broke." She didn't react. Not at first. She just looked at Eli like she expected him to pull a rope out and tie her hands, drag her by the wrist. But he didn't. He walked over to the platform, pulled a coin pouch from his coat, dropped 2 silver pieces in the man's hand, then looked at her. Not as a purchase, not like something owned. Just looked. "Come on," he said quietly. She stepped down. No one clapped. No one cheered. The wind blew again, and the crowd began to scatter like it had never happened. Just another day in Dustwood. Just another soul, with nowhere else to go. The wagon creaked as Eli guided the horses north, away from town, along a path lined with dead grass and sun-baked fences. The girl sat beside him, hands clasped in her lap, not speaking. Her body was tense, like she expected a sudden slap or shout. Eli said nothing. He let the silence sit, let it breathe. The sun dipped as the land stretched open. Dry, cracked plains that rolled toward the foothills like tired blankets. Eventually, the outline of the ranch came into view. Weathered house, red barn, crooked windmill. No one waiting, no smoke from the chimney, no dog barking. Just quiet. Eli pulled the wagon to a stop. "You'll sleep inside. Room next to mine. There's water for wash and food in the kitchen. I'll show you where things are." She didn't move. "I ain't gonna touch you," he added, softer now. "Ain't expectin' anything. You work if you want. You eat regardless." Her eyes flicked to his. He held the gaze just long enough for her to see there wasn't a trap behind it. Then he climbed down, tied the reins, and disappeared into the barn. She stepped off the wagon on her own. The room was small, plain. A single bed with a quilt folded at the end. A table with a bowl and a pitcher of water. A cracked mirror on the wall. The window faced the barn, where she could see him moving, feeding horses, checking fences, shoulders rolled forward from years of repetition. She stood in the doorway for a long while, unsure. Then she closed it. That first night, Clara didn't sleep. She kept her shoes on, the blanket only pulled up to her chest, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak made her flinch. But no one came. No footsteps. Just wind rattling loose boards and the distant stomp of a horse in its stall. Morning broke in gold and orange. She found a tin plate of eggs and bread on the kitchen table. Still warm, Eli was outside, hammering at the fence. She stood in the doorway. "You want me to cook next time?" He didn't look up. "If you want. If not, I got it." She waited. "You expect me to clean the house?" "I expect you to be warm and fed. Rest'll come if it wants to." She watched him work, the way he handled the hammer, how he leaned into the post like it carried more than wood. "Can I feed the horses?" she asked. He nodded once. The barn was thick with the smell of hay and old leather. The horses eyed her warily at first, then relaxed when she moved slow, whispering to them like she used to as a girl on her father's farm before the bank took everything. She found peace there, brushing manes, cleaning stalls, hearing the soft snorts of animals who didn't expect lies. Days passed. Eli didn't talk much. He rose early, worked until dusk, came in to eat, then sat on the porch, staring at the horizon until dark. Clara began cooking simple meals, sweeping floors, and planting herbs near the window, not because she had to, but because she wanted something to grow. Trust came in inches. One night, she brought him a cup of tea. He took it without a word, sipped, then said, "This good." She blinked. "Didn't know you liked tea." "Didn't know I did either." She smiled for the first time. Just a flicker, then gone. Another evening, she found him staring at a photograph in his hand. A woman with soft eyes, holding a baby blanket. "Your wife?" she asked. He looked startled, like he didn't expect the question. "She died," he said simply. "We tried for years. Never had kids. Doctor said I couldn't. Buried her on that hill yonder." He nodded toward the ridge. Clara sat beside him. The silence wasn't heavy that time. It was shared. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Me too." Weeks stretched into months. She stopped flinching when he walked behind her. He stopped waiting for her to leave. They settled into a rhythm. Two people who had lost too much, slowly finding pieces of themselves in the quiet of the plains. She found herself humming while sweeping. He chuckled once when she tripped over a saddle. They shared apples under the porch when the sun dipped low and painted the sky in fire. She talked about her mother's old garden. He told her stories about a stubborn mule he once owned. There was no sudden shift, no declaration. Just days that felt less lonely. Nights that didn't ache as much. One morning, she handed him a worn scarf she'd mended. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I wanted to." He put it on. Later, as the sun set behind the hills and the wind carried the scent of blooming sage, Clara stood on the porch watching Eli work. He moved slower now, a little older, a little quieter, but she saw the steadiness in him, the kind of man who didn't take what wasn't his, who offered a place when the world had shut its doors. She still didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't dread it. Inside the house, a fire crackled softly. The wind whispered through the grass, and in that moment, something tender and unnamed settled between them. No longer strangers, not yet lovers. Just two broken pieces, finally beginning to fit. The morning sun filtered through thin curtains and painted soft stripes on the wooden floorboards. Clara woke slowly, blinking at the warmth that fell across her face. The night had been still. No nightmares, no wind rattling the windows, only the steady thump of her own heartbeat and the distant sound of a rooster announcing the day. She sat up and stretched, her fingers brushing the quilt she'd begun stitching back together the week before. The house was quiet, but not in the same way it had been that first night. This silence no longer felt heavy or haunted. It felt lived in, like the calm that came after rain. She got up, washed her face with cool water from the basin, tied her hair back with a frayed ribbon, and slipped on her boots. Eli was already outside, hammering a loose board back onto the corral. His coat flapped in the breeze, and his breath clouded faintly in the early cold. Clara watched him from the porch for a moment, noting the slow, deliberate way he worked, like every movement was part of a ritual. He didn't look up, but he must have heard her because he said without turning, "Frost came in hard last night. Might want to check the coop. Chickens don't like cold toes." She smiled. "Neither do I." He finally glanced over his shoulder, his lips twitching in what might have been the beginnings of a grin, then went back to hammering. She stepped off the porch and crossed the dirt yard, her boots crunching on brittle leaves. The chicken coop sat near the edge of the barn, and the birds clucked irritably when she opened the door. She murmured to them as she cleaned out the straw, replaced the feed, and gently scooped one hen who'd tangled herself in old twine. The morning passed with that sort of quiet usefulness, the kind that filled your hands and left your mind in peace. Inside, she found the old cast-iron pan and fried up 2 eggs, sliced what little bread was left, and set the table for 2. When Eli walked in, wiping his hands on a rag, he paused in the doorway. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she said simply, then nodded at the seat across from hers. "Come eat." They sat and ate in silence. Not awkward, not distant, just comfortable. The clink of forks and the crackle of the fireplace filled the space between them. After breakfast, Eli brought a saddle inside. The leather was cracked, the stitching near the horn frayed. Clara watched him set it on the table with a sigh. "This one belonged to my father," he said, sitting down with a roll of thread and a bone needle. "He swore it'd outlive him." It nearly did. Clara leaned forward. "I can help." He hesitated. "I used to sew harnesses and bootstraps for my brother," she added. "I can do strong seams." He handed her the needle. They worked side by side for hours, fingers moving with quiet focus. Occasionally their hands brushed, but neither pulled away. When the sun reached its peak, Clara leaned back and wiped sweat from her brow. "You ever thought about selling this place?" she asked suddenly. Eli looked up. "Why?" She shrugged. "It's a lot of work for one man." He nodded slowly. "It is. But you love it." He met her gaze. "It's not the land I love. It's the doing, the fixing, the tending, even if nothing stays fixed for long." Clara smiled faintly. "That's a kind of love." That night she couldn't sleep. The wind had picked up again, whistling through the cracks in the walls. She wrapped herself in her blanket and crept to the kitchen for water. As she passed the front room, she saw Eli sitting by the fire, the light flickering across his face. He didn't look surprised to see her. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No." She hesitated, then sat across from him. The silence stretched again, long and steady. The fire popped. "Do you miss her?" Clara asked. He looked into the flames. "Every day, but not the way I used to." Clara waited. "I used to think if I remembered her enough, she'd come back," he said, "but she's gone. And she wouldn't want me walking around like a ghost." "You're not a ghost," Clara said. "Not anymore." He turned to her. "And you?" "I was, for a while." They sat in the quiet for what felt like hours. Eventually, Clara stood. Before she walked away, she said softly, "Thank you." "For what?" "For not treating me like I was bought." He didn't reply, but his eyes followed her until she disappeared into the hallway. The next day brought trouble. They were in town for supplies. Clara carried a basket as Eli loaded bags of oats and seed into the wagon. At the general store, she lingered by the jars of preserves, trying to remember the taste of apricot. That's when she heard the voice. "Well, look what the wind dragged back." She turned to see a man, broad-shouldered, heavy-lidded eyes, a crooked grin full of teeth too white to be trusted. She recognized him from the auction. "You enjoying that fancy ranch life, sweetheart?" he drawled. "How much does he pay you to keep quiet?" Clara stiffened. "Go away." The man stepped closer. "Don't get sassy now. I remember what you looked like on that platform. Pretty as a whip. Shame you had to end up with a half-dead mule like Mercer." Eli was there in an instant. "Step back," he said, his voice calm but sharp enough to draw blood. The man raised his hands. "Easy, old man. Just catching up with a friend." "She's not your friend." "You sure about that? You bought her, didn't you? Or was it charity?" Eli didn't raise his fists. He didn't shout. He just stared, long and unblinking, until the man stepped back and muttered something under his breath before walking away. Clara's hands were trembling. "I'm sorry," Eli said as they rode out of town. "Shouldn't have brought you there." "No," she whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." The ride home was quiet. That night, she found herself on the porch again, arms crossed against the chill. Eli joined her, holding a cup of something steaming. "You know," he said, "people in this town, they talk because they're empty. They rattle like cans in the wind. You don't need to listen to them." "I'm not used to anyone defending me." "Well," he said, sipping his drink, "you better get used to it." The days after that were soft again. Clara began singing while she worked. Eli made a habit of leaving fresh-picked apples on the table in the morning. She started calling the horses by name. He built her a garden box out of scrap wood so she could plant her herbs properly. One evening, as they cleaned tack in the barn, a sudden storm rolled in. Rain pounded the roof like fists. The wind howled. They stood close, watching the downpour. Clara laughed. "You ever seen rain come that fast?" "Not since I was a boy." Lightning split the sky. The barn shuddered. He looked at her. "You all right?" She nodded. "I like storms. They remind me I'm still here." He reached up and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. It was the first time he'd touched her that way. She didn't pull back. That night, she dreamed of rain and warm hands. The weeks blurred. Chores, meals, quiet evenings. They spoke more freely now. She told him about the time her little brother got stuck in a grain silo, and she had to pull him out with a rope. He told her about the time he tried to ride a bull to impress his wife and ended up with a broken collarbone and a lecture that lasted 2 days. She laughed more. He did too sometimes, but there were moments still, quiet ones, when Clara would freeze mid-motion or when Eli would look off toward the hill where his wife lay buried, eyes distant. They never pretended those ghosts weren't there, but they didn't let them rule the house anymore. One evening, she brought in 2 mugs of cider and handed him one without a word. He took it, sipped, then looked at her for a long moment. "I don't know what this is becoming," he said quietly. "Me neither," she replied. "But I don't want it to stop." She set her mug down and took his hand in hers. "Then don't." The fire burned low that night, but the warmth between them held. Outside, the wind carried the scent of wet earth and fresh promise, and for the first time, neither of them felt alone. The mornings had grown warmer, and the fields around the ranch were no longer brittle and brown. Patches of green crept across the earth like quiet forgiveness. Clara knelt in the garden box Eli had built her, pressing her fingers into the dirt with a kind of reverence. It was the first time in years she had grown something from seed. The sprigs of thyme and mint had taken root, fragile yet defiant against the wind. Inside the house, Eli was sharpening his tools at the kitchen table. The rhythmic scrape of metal on stone drifted through the open window and mingled with the chirp of meadowlarks perched on the fence posts. He had started to hum lately, low, tuneless murmurs that came and went like passing clouds. He didn't even notice when he did it, but Clara heard it every time. and it made her smile without meaning to. That afternoon they sat on the porch together, sipping coffee. The air was still, thick with that peculiar silence that only came after a string of long, good days. She traced her finger along the rim of her cup, then said without looking up, "Do you think the past ever lets go?" Eli didn't answer right away. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, watching the way the wind caught the tall grass. "I don't think it lets go," he said finally. "I think maybe we just get stronger holding it." Clara nodded. "You ever think about leaving this place? Just starting over somewhere new?" "I used to," he said. "When Martha died, I thought about selling everything, heading east. Thought maybe I could find something else to live for." "And?" He looked at her. "Then I realized it wasn't the place that was empty. It was me." They fell into silence again, but this one was different. It was full of something unspoken, something waiting. Later, as dusk crept in and painted the land in shadows, Clara found herself near the ridge behind the barn, the hill that overlooked the property. She hadn't gone up there before, not out of fear, but respect. That's where Eli had buried his wife, but something pulled her up there now. The grass was long and swayed like waves around her ankles. A single wooden cross stood at the top, weathered by time and wind. Clara stood a few feet away, folding her hands in front of her. "I don't know you," she whispered, "but I know he loved you." She looked out across the land, saw the house below, the fences Eli mended every week, the barn with the squeaky door she meant to fix. "He's not the same man, is he?" she said softly. "Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe he needed to become someone else to keep going." A breeze rolled through, warm and steady. It wasn't an answer. But it wasn't silence, either. That night, Clara sat at the table sewing a button back onto Eli's shirt. He watched her, his cup of coffee forgotten in his hands. "You went up the ridge," he said quietly. She looked up. "I hope that's all right." He nodded. "She'd have liked you," Clara smiled faintly. "Did you talk about having children?" Eli looked down. "We tried. For years. Doctor said it was me. We kept hoping anyway. But it never happened. After a while, she stopped hoping." "I didn't blame her," he set his cup down. "Truth is, I stopped believing I could ever have a family after that. Not just the children, everything. Love, laughter, warmth." She threaded the needle through the fabric again. "And now?" He didn't answer, but he didn't need to. The next morning brought visitors. A wagon rolled up just after sunrise, and Clara peered through the window to see a man in a long coat and two boys climbing down with boxes in their arms. Eli opened the door before they knocked. "Luke," he said. The man grinned. "Still grumpy before coffee, I see. Still loud as a drunk horse." They embraced briefly, then stepped aside so the boys could carry the boxes into the house. "Supplies?" Luke explained, and the usual round of bad jokes and gossip. "You look good, Eli. Better than the last time I saw you. I'm older. You're always older." Luke turned to Clara, who had stepped into the room cautiously. "And you must be the reason this place looks less like a tomb these days." Clara flushed. Eli cleared his throat. "This is Clara. She helps out around the place." "Helps out, huh?" Luke smirked, but only gently. "Nice to meet you, Clara." Likewise. Luke and Eli spent the next hour talking out back, voices rising and falling like an old tune. Clara poured lemonade and handed glasses through the kitchen window to the boys, who sat on the porch swinging their legs and whispering about the chickens. Later, when the wagon rolled away and the dust settled behind it, Eli stood on the porch watching it disappear. "You don't talk about your friends much," Clara said. "Don't have many," he replied. "But Luke's good people. He was with me when Martha passed." They didn't say anything more, but Clara noticed the way Eli watched the road long after the wagon had vanished. The next day brought thunder, low rumbles across the plains and clouds the color of bruises. Clara pulled in the laundry, and Eli checked the barn doors twice. When the rain finally came, it fell in sheets. They watched it from the porch again, standing close beneath the overhang. "I used to love storms," Clara said. "What changed?" "Nothing, really. Just forgot how to feel safe in them." Eli looked at her. "You safe now?" She turned to him, and for once, she didn't hesitate. Yes, they didn't kiss. They didn't even touch. But it was a moment as intimate as anything that had come before. That night, sleep came easy. But the dreams didn't. Clara woke before dawn, her chest tight, her breath shallow. She sat up and pressed her palm to her throat, forcing the panic down. The room was dark, the wind had died, and the rain was now just a memory tapping gently against the windows. She got up, walked barefoot to the front room, and stood in front of the fire, watching the coals breathe orange beneath a bed of ash. Eli appeared in the doorway. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded. "Nightmares?" She nodded again. He walked over, slow and careful, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed. When he stood beside her, she turned and stepped forward. Her forehead met his chest. He didn't speak, just wrapped his arms around her and held her like she was the most fragile thing he'd ever touched. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not asking me to explain." The days after passed like pages turning in a book with no title. Clara spent time sketching in an old notebook she found in a drawer. Eli noticed she drew the horses first, then the house, then the ridge. One afternoon, she showed him a page where she had drawn the two of them sitting on the porch. He stared at it for a long time. "I don't look that peaceful," he said. "You do to me." That night, he placed the drawing inside an old cigar box in his room, beside the only photo he had of Martha. The garden bloomed by mid-season, the herbs overflowed their box, and Clara began making teas and meals flavored with fresh thyme and rosemary. Eli built her a second box without saying a word, just pointed at it one morning and said, "Figured you'd need more room." She leaned over and kissed his cheek before heading inside. He stood there, staring at the spot where her lips had touched, like the sun had reached him in a place long frozen. They didn't talk about what they were. They didn't make plans or promises. But one night, as they lay in separate beds listening to the crickets outside, Eli said through the wall, "Clara?" "Yeah? I like having you here." She smiled into her pillow. "I like being here." She didn't hear the next part. He said it too softly, but he said it anyway. "I think I might love you." The golden edge of summer crept slowly across Dustwood County, and the days lingered a little longer with each passing evening. The sky turned a deeper shade of blue, the sun hung heavier, and the fields glowed with a richness that made Clara pause every time she walked them. Everything felt fuller. The land, the light, even her own breath in her chest. Eli had begun planting extra feed rows by the south fence, though he never said why. Clara caught him more than once staring at her when he thought she wasn't looking. And she let him. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she looked away, heart thudding in her chest like a trapped bird. They hadn't spoken of what lay between them, hadn't given it a name, but it was there now, settled like dust on everything they touched. She didn't hear him say those words through the wall that night, but she felt them in the way he moved afterward. He started pouring her coffee first in the morning. She caught him standing in the kitchen longer than usual, watching her cook like it was a sacred ritual. One night, he waited at the bottom of the stairs until she went to bed before turning off the lamp. Another night, she waited until he did. When the wind came again in early July, it carried with it the smell of distant fire, a grass blaze miles off, probably near the canyon. Eli stood on the porch and sniffed the air with a frown. "Dry season's early," he muttered. "We'll manage," Clara said, brushing off her apron. He turned to her, the lines around his eyes softening. "You always think we will." "I have to. Hope is stubborn that way." He smiled, rare and real, then went to check the water barrels. They spent the next few days prepping, rebuilding the barn's storm shutters, clearing brush near the fence line. Clara packed emergency food into a small wooden crate and placed it near the front door without being asked. Eli added his rifle next to it, just in case. And still, even with the edge of danger whispering through the heat, something quiet bloomed. One evening, Eli returned from town with an oil lamp and a bolt of blue fabric tied with twine. He set them on the kitchen table like it was nothing, but Clara froze when she saw it. "For the garden box cover," he said quickly, "to keep the rabbits out." She ran her fingers over the cloth. "This is silk." He looked down. "It was cheaper than I expected." She stared at him. "You bought silk for the rabbits?" His ears went red. "No, I mean, yes. I mean—" Clara laughed so suddenly and so brightly that he stopped mid-sentence. She stepped around the table and touched his sleeve. "You're a terrible liar," he grunted. "Never had much practice." She reached up then, fingertips brushing his cheek. He didn't flinch. He leaned into it. She kissed him. It wasn't rushed or breathless. It was warm, steady, like the earth holding the sky in place. And when they pulled apart, neither said a word. They didn't need to. That night, they sat on the porch holding hands, her head on his shoulder, watching stars melt across the sky like spilled sugar. The next morning, Eli walked into town alone. Clara stayed behind to tend to the hens and finish mending the gate latch, but something gnawed at her. A feeling, not dread, not quite, but close. The wind had picked up again, dry and sharp, stirring the dust into little devils that danced across the field. Eli didn't return by noon, or by supper. The sun had dropped behind the hills when the sound of wheels broke through the silence. Clara rushed to the porch, heart pounding. Eli's wagon rolled into view, but it was moving slow. Too slow. When he climbed down, he limped. She was at his side in seconds. "What happened?" He brushed her off gently. "Old injury. Just twisted it." "You're lying again." He chuckled weakly, still bad at it. Inside, she helped him sit. His hand was scraped, his shirt torn near the shoulder. "Some idiot thought it was funny to ask if I was still paying for you by the hour," he said. Clara went still. "I didn't hit him," Eli added. "Just stared. He tried to push me. I didn't move. Guess he hit the post behind me harder than I realized." Her hands trembled as she washed the cut. Not from fear, from rage. "You shouldn't go into town alone." "I can handle it." "You shouldn't have to." He looked up. "Neither should you." They stared at each other, and something shifted in her chest. Not just affection, not just longing, something deeper. That night, she sat beside him on the couch, his arm around her shoulders. He winced every time he moved, but he didn't complain. "Let me stay," she said suddenly. He blinked. "You already do." "No, I mean, really stay. Not just live here. Be part of here. You and me. Whatever this is, let's make it real." His voice was hoarse. "You sure?" She nodded. "I've never been more sure." He exhaled slowly. "I don't have a ring, or flowers, or the words people are supposed to say. I don't want those." "Then what do you want?" "You." He leaned in, kissed her again, softer this time, with the weight of all the things they hadn't said. And in that kiss, she heard them all. The next week passed in a haze of soft gestures and quiet joy. They didn't speak of marriage like it was an event, but like a truth already lived. Eli began building a small addition to the house, just one room, but with a window that faced the garden. Clara repainted the kitchen walls in a color she called cornflower blue, though Eli said it looked exactly like sky. She found herself waking up before him, just to watch the way his face relaxed in sleep. He found himself reaching for her hand out of instinct, as if her presence had always been part of his mornings. One afternoon, as she planted a second row of rosemary, a wave of nausea hit her so hard she nearly fell over. She sat in the dirt, head spinning, mouth dry. When Eli came rushing out, she waved him off. "Probably the heat," she said, though her voice wavered. The next day it happened again, this time in the kitchen. She was chopping carrots when the room tilted sideways, and she caught the edge of the table to stay upright. Eli carried her to the couch without argument. "Doctor," he said. "Now." She started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. He hitched the wagon and drove her to town, hands tight on the reins. The doctor, an old friend of Eli's named Greaves, ushered her into the back room and closed the curtain. When he emerged, his expression was unreadable. Eli stood. "What is it?" Greaves motioned him over. "It's not sickness," the doctor said. Clara sat up, eyes wide. "You sure?" Eli asked. Greaves nodded. "She's pregnant." The word hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Clara blinked. Eli froze. The doctor, perhaps sensing the depth of that silence, patted Eli's shoulder and disappeared back into the room. Eli sat down, hard. "I can't be." "I know," Clara whispered. "But it's true." He stared at her. "I was told I couldn't," he said. "We tried. For years." She reached for his hand. "Then maybe they were wrong. Or maybe this is something that doesn't need explaining." He didn't speak. His chest rose and fell like the earth itself had lost rhythm. Clara leaned forward. "If you don't want this, I understand. But—" He cut her off with a breathless whisper. "I want it." Tears welled in his eyes. He pressed her hand to his lips and held it there, his shoulders shaking. "I never thought," he began, then stopped. "I never thought I'd get another chance." They rode home in silence, her hand resting on his thigh the whole way. When they got back, he walked to the ridge. Alone. She watched him from the porch, arms wrapped around herself, heart fluttering with fear and hope. He returned at sunset. He knelt in front of her. "No preacher," he said. "No guests. Just you, me, and the sky." She nodded, tears in her throat. And in the golden quiet of dusk, they held each other. Two broken people, healed not by miracles, but by patience, kindness, and time. The sky over Dustwood County had never felt so wide. A breeze rolled across the hills and bent the tall grasses in one fluid motion, like the land itself was bowing to something greater. Clara stood barefoot in the field behind the barn, one hand resting just above her waist, the other shielding her eyes from the rising sun. The earth was warm beneath her feet. The birds had begun to sing. The smell of chamomile and wood smoke clung to the air like a memory refusing to fade. Behind her, the front door creaked open. Eli stepped out slowly, wiping the sleep from his eyes with one hand and resting the other against the doorframe. His shirt was wrinkled, his hair tousled, but his gaze was clear as ever. He didn't say a word, just watched her standing there in the open, alive in a way he'd never seen anyone be. Clara turned when she sensed him, a slow smile curving across her face. Her hand dropped from her forehead and came to rest gently on the small rise of her belly. He crossed the yard without speaking, without hurrying, until he stood in front of her. "I didn't dream it, did I?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and wonder. She shook her head. "You didn't." They stood together, the wind tugging softly at her dress, the sun kissing their skin, and for a moment, nothing else existed. Not Dustwood, not the past, not even the silence they used to live in. Just now, just them. Later that morning, Eli brought out the old saddle he'd been patching for over a year. It wasn't meant for any particular horse. It was a project born out of habit, something to keep his hands moving when his heart had felt still. But now, he set it on the railing of the porch with care, running his palm along the leather like it was sacred. Clara joined him with 2 cups of tea. "You still fixing that thing?" she teased gently. "Wasn't sure why I kept it," he said. "Maybe I do now." She leaned against him, her side pressing against his. He glanced down at her, then kissed the top of her head. "I thought I'd be scared," she murmured. "Are you?" "No," she closed her eyes. "Not with you." He didn't answer, but his hand found hers, fingers lacing without effort. In town, word had begun to spread. Dustwood wasn't large enough for secrets, and even fewer for miracles. Some folks stared longer at the market. Others stopped Eli to offer congratulations, half drenched in disbelief. A few muttered insults under their breath, but they were fewer now, and none of them dared say anything to Clara's face. She carried herself differently now, straighter, more sure. At the general store, the old shopkeeper leaned forward and whispered, You'll be needing flannel for that little one, I reckon." Clara blushed, her fingers brushing over the folded fabric. "Maybe blue," she said, then quickly added, "or green." "Or both," the woman said, smiling. "Might be the world's telling you it's time for color again." Back at the ranch, preparations began in quiet ways. Eli built a small crib out of cedar. It wasn't perfect. Some of the corners were uneven, and the grain splintered in places, but it was sturdy. He ran his hand along the rails as if he couldn't believe it was real. Clara filled the drawers with tiny clothes. She stitched each hem herself, fingers working late into the night by candlelight. She hummed as she worked, sometimes old tunes from her childhood, other times melodies she didn't know the name of, just notes that made her heart feel full. One night, she stood in the doorway of the nursery and watched the moonlight spill through the window and onto the crib. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. Eli came behind her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "Neither did I." They stood there in silence, watching the empty crib that wouldn't be empty much longer. It wasn't all easy. There were days Clara couldn't keep down food, nights where the baby kicked so hard it stole her breath. Eli fetched cold towels, made broth, held her hand through waves of discomfort. He built a bench near the porch for her to sit on when walking became difficult. She'd often find him standing behind her at dusk, holding a glass of water, not saying anything, just being there. She started having dreams, vivid ones. Sometimes she saw a boy with Eli's eyes and her smile, running barefoot through the fields, laughing like thunder in springtime. Other nights, she saw darkness, shadows of the past clawing at the edges, voices from long ago whispering, reminding her of what she used to be. But in those dreams, too, there was always Eli, standing tall, one hand stretched toward her, the other holding a lantern. She always reached for him, and always woke up safe. On the first day of September, the pain came. It started as a tightness low in her back, then rolled forward like the tide. At first, she kept quiet. Didn't want to scare him. But when she doubled over by the coop, hand gripping the fence post, Eli dropped his hammer mid-swing and was at her side before she could even cry out. He carried her inside, placed her gently on the bed, then ran out the door to saddle the horse and fetch the doctor. By the time he returned, her face was pale, slick with sweat. Greaves worked quickly, calmly, guiding her breath, watching each moment with the precision of a man who'd done this 100 times. Eli sat beside her, gripping her hand, whispering her name like a prayer. She screamed once, sharp and raw, and he held her tighter, wishing he could take the pain himself. Hours passed. Then, finally, the silence broke with a sound neither of them had ever heard before in real life. A cry, weak at first, then louder, stronger, hungry. Clara sobbed, gasping for air. Eli's shoulders shook. Greaves handed them the child wrapped in a worn towel, his hands trembling slightly now. "It's a boy," he said softly. Eli took the bundle, his hands shaking, eyes wide. The baby blinked up at him, face red and scrunched, fists balled tight. Eli stared for a long time, unable to speak. Then he looked at Clara. "He's real," he whispered. She nodded, tears falling freely. "He's ours." They named him Hope. The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights, soft cries, gentle rocking. The house, once so still, now thrummed with life. The sound of tiny feet kicking in blankets, the scent of milk and earth and sunlight, laughter, real, full, unstoppable, filled the rooms daily. Eli sang lullabies off-key, rocking Hope in that cedar crib. Clara kissed every inch of her son's face until he squealed with delight. They took turns feeding him, changing him, swaddling him, staring at him like he was made of light. One day, Clara stood on the porch holding the boy, the breeze tugging at her hair. Eli stepped beside her, slipping his arm around her waist. "I used to think peace was a place," he said, "and now? Now I know it's a person." She looked down at the child nestled in her arms. Maybe two. That night, the stars burned brighter than they ever had. Eli stepped outside and looked toward the ridge. He didn't climb it. Just stood there, hand over his chest, eyes wet, heart full. "Thank you," he whispered. He wasn't sure who he was thanking. God, Martha, time, maybe all of them, maybe none. But it didn't matter. The past hadn't let go. But it had made room. And Eli Mercer, the man once forgotten by the world, stood now not as a ghost, but as a husband, a father, and a man reborn. The baby stirred in the night. Clara woke first and reached for him, humming as she pulled him close. Eli rolled over, reached out blindly, and found her hand. She squeezed his fingers gently. "I love you," she whispered. He was already smiling. "I know." In a land shaped by hardship and silence, love took root not in grand gestures, but in quiet acts of kindness, patience, and unwavering trust. What began with two broken souls, one offering shelter, the other seeking dignity, blossomed into a life neither of them dared to dream. Against the odds, in the dusty corners of Dustwood County, a forgotten rancher and a discarded girl built a family, proving that even the deepest wounds can bloom into something whole. If stories of hope rising from heartache speak to your soul, don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Love Chronicles, where every tale carries the grit, romance, and redemption of the untamed frontier. Tap that bell and never miss the next unforgettable story waiting just beyond the horizon.